The sound of knuckles against flesh echoed through the smoke-filled saloon like a judge's gavel sealing a death sentence. Lena Moore's body hit the floor for the third time that night, her vision swimming with stars and shame. Above her, Big Jack Thornton raised his fist again, his face twisted with the kind of rage only whiskey and unchecked power could breed. The other girls looked away. They always did. No one intervened in Colorado territory, not for women like her. But then a voice cut through the chaos like a knife through silk. Touch her again, and you'll answer to me. Before we continue, if you're enjoying this story, please hit that like button and comment with your city so I can see how far this tale has traveled. Now, let's begin where it all started, with blood, bruises, and a choice that would change everything. The day had started like every other day in Lena Moore's life, with exhaustion already settling into her bones before the sun fully crested the mountains. She woke in the cramped attic room she shared with 3 other girls above the Silver Dollar Saloon, her muscles aching from the previous night's work. The space was barely larger than a horse stall, with 4 narrow beds pressed against walls that didn't quite keep out the Colorado wind. In winter, frost formed on the inside of the windows. In summer, the heat was suffocating. But it was shelter, and shelter cost. In sweat, in dignity, in pieces of yourself you could never get back. Lena was 22 years old, though some days she felt ancient. She dressed quickly in the dim pre-dawn light, pulling on the same faded calico dress she'd worn for 2 years. It had been mended so many times the original fabric was hard to distinguish from the patches. Her fingers, roughened from washing glasses and scrubbing floors, fumbled with the buttons. She splashed cold water from the basin onto her face, avoiding her reflection in the cracked mirror. She'd stopped looking at herself months ago. The woman staring back was a stranger, hollow-eyed, thin-lipped, fading. By the time she made it downstairs, Big Jack Thornton was already awake. That was never a good sign. Jack Thornton owned the Silver Dollar, along with half the buildings on Main Street and a considerable portion of the mining claims in the hills beyond town. He was a thick-necked bull of a man, with hands like ham hocks and a disposition that soured with every passing year. Money had made him powerful. Whiskey had made him mean, and the frontier, lawless, indifferent, violent, had made him untouchable. "You're late," he growled from behind the bar, though the sun hadn't yet cleared the horizon. "No, sir," Lena said quietly, keeping her eyes down. "It's barely 5, like." "Don't contradict me, girl." She bit her tongue and moved past him into the back room where the real work began. Floors to scrub, tables to wipe, bottles to inventory. The Silver Dollar didn't open until noon, but the preparation started hours earlier, and if the work wasn't done to Jack's satisfaction, there would be consequences. There were always consequences. Lena had come to Colorado 3 years ago with her father, a prospector chasing dreams of silver in the mountains. He died 6 months later in a mine collapse, leaving her with nothing but his debts. Jack had purchased those debts from the claim office, and with them, he'd purchased her. Not officially, slavery had been abolished more than a decade earlier, but the arithmetic of poverty was its own form of bondage. She owed him for her father's funeral, for her room and board, for the dresses she wore and the food she ate. The debt never seemed to shrink, no matter how many hours she worked, and Jack made sure she understood exactly what would happen if she tried to leave. The morning passed in a blur of monotonous labor. By 10 o'clock, her back was screaming. By 11, her hands were raw from lye soap. When the saloon finally opened and the first customers trickled in, Lena forced a smile and carried drinks from the bar to the tables, moving through the crowd like a ghost. The Silver Dollar was the largest saloon in Redemption, Colorado, a town that had sprung up almost overnight when silver was discovered in the surrounding hills. It catered to miners, ranchers, drifters, and gamblers, men whose lives were hard and whose entertainments were harder. The air was thick with tobacco smoke and the sour smell of spilled beer. A piano player named Sal hammered out tinny melodies in the corner while men played poker, traded lies, and drank themselves into oblivion. Lena had learned to navigate this world by making herself invisible. Speak when spoken to. Smile but don't engage. Pour the drinks and collect the coins and disappear before trouble found you. Most nights, it worked. But tonight was different. Tonight, she'd been awake for nearly 20 hours. The previous evening had stretched past 3 in the morning. A big crowd. A fight that had broken out near the bar, glass everywhere, Jack screaming at her to clean faster. She'd finally collapsed into bed around 4, only to be roused again at 5 for the morning shift. Her body was running on fumes, her mind a hazy fog. She moved mechanically, one foot in front of the other, pouring whiskey and dodging hands and praying for closing time. Around 8 o'clock, she delivered a bottle of bourbon to a table near the back. 4 miners, flush with a fresh strike, were celebrating loudly. One of them grabbed her wrist as she set down the glasses. "Stay a while, sweetheart," he slurred, pulling her toward his lap. "I can't, sir," Lena said, extracting her arm with practiced efficiency. "I have other tables." "Oh, come on now, sit." "She said no, Charlie," one of his companions laughed. "Let the girl work." The miner released her with a grunt, and Lena moved away quickly, her heart pounding. Close call, too close. She could feel Jack's eyes on her from across the room, watching, judging. If she caused a scene, if she upset a paying customer, there would be hell to pay. She made it another hour before the exhaustion truly hit. It came over her like a wave, sudden, overwhelming, irresistible. One moment she was carrying a tray of empty glasses back to the bar. The next, her vision tunneled and her knees buckled. She caught herself against a chair, breathing hard, the room spinning around her. "Keep moving," Jack barked from behind the bar. Lena nodded, though she wasn't sure he could see her. She forced herself upright and stumbled toward the back room, thinking she could splash water on her face, steal 30 seconds to gather herself. But her legs wouldn't cooperate. The floor seemed to tilt beneath her feet. She made it as far as the hallway before her body simply gave out. She didn't remember sitting down. One moment she was standing, the next she was on the floor with her back against the wall, her eyes drifting closed. Just for a second, she told herself, just long enough to catch her breath. The noise from the saloon seemed to fade, replaced by a deep, merciful silence. When she opened her eyes again, Jack was standing over her. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Lena's heart lurched. She scrambled to her feet, or tried to. Her legs were asleep, her movements clumsy. "I'm sorry. You just what?" Jack's face was flushed, his breath reeking of whiskey. "Decided to take a nap while I've got a full house out there?" "No, sir, I was—" "Get up. Get—" She tried. She genuinely tried, but her body betrayed her, and she stumbled, catching herself against the wall. It was the wrong move. Everything she did now was the wrong move. Jack's hand shot out and grabbed her by the arm, yanking her upright with enough force to make her shoulder scream. "You lazy, worthless—" "I'm sorry," Lena gasped. "Please, I'll get back to work." "Damn right you will." He dragged her back into the main room, and every head turned to watch. The piano music stopped. Conversations died mid-sentence. Lena's face burned with humiliation as Jack hauled her to the center of the floor like a disobedient child. "You think you can sleep on my time?" he roared, his voice carrying to every corner of the saloon. "You think I'm running a charity here?" "No, sir." The first blow came without warning. His open palm caught her across the face, with enough force to snap her head sideways. Pain exploded through her cheek and jaw. She tasted blood. The room gasped, a collective intake of breath. But no one moved. No one intervened. This was frontier justice. A man's right to discipline his property. "Jack, maybe—" Someone started from one of the tables. "Shut your mouth," Jack snarled. "This ain't your concern." Lena's ears were ringing. She couldn't think, couldn't process what was happening. She only knew that she needed to get away, needed to make herself small, needed to disappear. But Jack still had hold of her arm, and when she tried to pull free, he hit her again. This time it was a closed fist. She went down hard, her body crumpling like wet paper. The floor rushed up to meet her, and she felt something crack. Her ribs, maybe, or her wrist as she tried to catch herself. The impact knocked the wind from her lungs. She lay there, gasping, the world reduced to pain and the sour smell of beer-soaked floorboards. "Get up," Jack commanded. Lena couldn't. She physically couldn't. Her body had reached its limit, and even the fear of another beating couldn't make her limbs respond. "I said get up!" He grabbed her by the hair and hauled her to her knees. Tears streamed down her face, tears of pain, of shame, of absolute helplessness. Around her, the saloon remained silent. Witnesses, but no defenders. They'd seen this before. They'd see it again. Frontier life was hard, and it was hardest on those with no power to fight back. Jack raised his fist for another blow, and then a hand caught his wrist mid-swing. That's enough. The voice was quiet, but it carried. It had the weight of absolute certainty behind it, the kind of tone that made men pause regardless of their intentions. Jack froze, his arm suspended in the air, and slowly turned to see who had dared to interfere. The man standing behind him was tall and lean, dressed in worn denim and a dusty brown coat. His face was shadowed by the brim of a black Stetson, but even in the dim saloon light his eyes were visible, gray as winter storms and just as unyielding. He didn't look angry, he looked resolved. There was a significant difference. "Who the hell are you?" Jack demanded, trying to wrench his arm free. The stranger's grip didn't budge. "Someone who's seen enough." "This is my business." "Not anymore." The stranger released Jack's wrist and stepped between him and Lena, a human shield that radiated quiet danger. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Everything about his posture, the set of his shoulders, the position of his hand near the pistol on his hip, communicated exactly how serious he was. "You're making a mistake, friend," Jack said, but there was uncertainty creeping into his bluster now. "That girl owes me." "I don't care what she owes you," the stranger interrupted. "No debt gives you the right to beat a woman half to death in front of witnesses. This is my saloon. I know whose saloon this is." The stranger's tone didn't change, but something in it made Jack take a step back. "I also know you've got a reputation for this kind of thing. Seems like someone should have drawn a line a long time ago." "Are you threatening me?" "I'm stating a fact. Touch her again, and we'll have a different kind of conversation, the kind that happens in the street." The challenge hung in the air like gun smoke. Jack's face went through several shades of red. He was a bully, accustomed to using his size and position to intimidate those weaker than himself. But this stranger wasn't weak, and he wasn't intimidated. Jack's eyes flicked to the pistol on the man's hip, then to the crowd of onlookers who were now watching with rapt attention. Pride warred with self-preservation. Finally, Jack spat on the floor. "Fine. Take the worthless bitch. She ain't worth the trouble anyway." "She was worth beating a moment ago." "I said take her." Jack's voice cracked with impotent rage. "But she still owes me for how much?" The question caught Jack off guard. "What? How much does she owe you?" The stranger's tone was patient, almost conversational. "For her debts? How much?" Jack's eyes narrowed, calculating. This was a transaction now, something he understood. $300. For her father's funeral, her room, and board. Wages advanced, $300. The stranger nodded slowly. "That's a lot of money for a girl who works 20-hour days. You sure you're keeping honest books? Are you calling me a liar?" "I'm saying $300 sounds like the kind of debt that never gets paid off, no matter how hard someone works." The stranger reached into his coat and produced a leather wallet. He counted out bills with deliberate precision, then held them up where everyone could see. "Here's $300. Her debt's paid. She's free to go." The crowd murmured. This was unprecedented. Jack stared at the money, his expression unreadable. For a moment, Lena thought he might refuse, that his pride would override his greed, but then his thick fingers snatched the bills from the stranger's hand. "Fine," he growled, "but I want her out of my building tonight, and if I ever see her again—" "You won't," the stranger said flatly, "because she's leaving with me right now." He turned and knelt beside Lena, who was still on her knees, trembling and disoriented. Up close she could see his face more clearly, weathered by sun and wind, probably in his early 30s, with the kind of lines around his eyes that came from squinting at distant horizons. But there was kindness there too, something gentle beneath the hardness. "Can you stand?" he asked quietly. Lena tried to answer and found her voice had abandoned her. She nodded instead, though she wasn't sure it was true. The stranger offered his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. His grip was firm but careful, as though he understood exactly how fragile she was in this moment. He helped her to her feet, keeping one hand on her elbow to steady her. The room tilted dangerously, and she swayed. Without a word, the stranger slipped his arm around her waist, supporting most of her weight. "Easy," he murmured, "one step at a time." They moved toward the door together, and the crowd parted like the Red Sea. Lena kept her eyes down, unable to bear the weight of their stares. Some pitying, some curious, some resentful that she'd found a way out when they were still trapped in their own hells. Behind them, Jack's voice rang out one last time. "She ain't gonna last a week out there. You'll see. She'll come crawling back, and when she does—" The stranger stopped. He didn't turn around, but his voice carried clearly across the silent room. "If she ever comes back here, and I find out you so much as looked at her wrong, I'll burn this place to the ground with you inside it. That's not a threat, Mr. Thornton. It's a promise." Then they were through the door and out into the night. The cool air hit Lena like a slap, shocking after the stifling heat of the saloon. She gulped it down, her lungs burning, her head spinning. The stranger guided her down the steps and away from the building, not stopping until they were halfway down Main Street. Only then did he release her, though he stayed close in case she fell. "You're safe now," he said. "He won't follow." Lena finally found her voice. "Who are you?" "Ethan Cole. I've got a ranch about 10 miles outside town." He studied her face with concern. "You need a doctor? I don't have money for—" "I'm not asking if you have money. I'm asking if you need a doctor." She touched her cheek gingerly, feeling the swelling already forming. Her ribs ached with every breath, and her wrist throbbed where she'd landed on it. But nothing felt broken. She'd survived worse. "I'll be all right." "That's not what I asked." Despite everything, Lena felt the ghost of a smile tug at her split lip. "No, I don't need a doctor." Ethan nodded, accepting her assessment. "Where are your things?" "I don't have any things. Everything I owned was in that room, and it all belonged to Jack anyway." The reality of her situation was starting to sink in now. She was standing in the middle of Main Street with nothing but the clothes on her back and a stranger who'd paid $300 to free her from a debt she'd never asked for. "Why did you do that?" "Do what?" "Buy my debt. Threaten Jack Thornton. You don't even know me." Ethan was quiet for a moment, his eyes distant. When he spoke, his voice was measured. "Let's just say I know what it's like when no one stands up for you. Figured it was past time someone did. $300 is a lot of money. It is. I can't pay you back. I'm not asking you to." Lena stared at him, trying to understand the angle, the trap, the expectation that always came with men's generosity. But his expression remained open, patient. "Then what do you want?" "Right now? To get you somewhere safe. Beyond that," he shrugged, "we can figure it out in the morning." "I'm not gonna—" She stopped, unsure how to phrase it delicately. Ethan's jaw tightened, but not with anger, with something that looked almost like regret. "I have a ranch. It's a working cattle operation. I've got 3 hired hands, a cook named Maria who's about 60 years old and meaner than a rattlesnake when someone gets on her bad side, and more work than we can handle. I'm offering you a job. Honest work, fair pay, and a room of your own. No strings, no expectations. Just work." "Why would you—" "Because everyone deserves a second chance," he said simply, "and because what I saw in there made me sick to my stomach. You can take the offer or leave it, but either way you're not going back to that saloon." Lena's throat tightened. She'd been waiting for the catch, the condition, the moment when this stranger's kindness revealed its true price. But looking into Ethan Cole's eyes, she saw only sincerity. It was so foreign, so unexpected that she didn't know how to respond. "I don't even know how to work on a ranch," she finally admitted. "You'll learn. Maria will teach you." He glanced back toward the silver dollar, where shadows moved behind the lit windows. "We should get moving. I've got a wagon at the livery. Can you make it that far?" Lena tested her weight on her legs. They trembled, but held. "I think so." They walked together through the darkened streets of Redemption, past the assayer's office and the general store, past the church with its whitewashed steeple and the undertaker's parlor with its grim shingle. The town was settling in for the night, lights winking out one by one as respectable folks went to bed. Only the saloons and gambling halls remained bright, spilling music and laughter into the darkness. Lena had lived in this town for 3 years, but she'd never really seen it like this, as a place she might actually leave. At the livery, Ethan retrieved his wagon and helped her onto the bench seat. She moved stiffly, every muscle protesting. He didn't comment on it, just climbed up beside her and took the reins. The horses, a matched pair of chestnuts, started forward without being told. They rode in silence for several minutes, leaving the lights of redemption behind. The road stretched out before them, silvered by moonlight, winding through scrub grass and scattered pine. Above, the stars blazed with an intensity that always startled Lena, even after years in Colorado. The sky here was bigger than it had any right to be, vast and humbling. "Why tonight?" she asked suddenly. Ethan glanced at her. "What do you mean? Why did you step in tonight? I've been working at that saloon for 3 years. Jack's beaten me before. Other men have seen it happen. Why were you different?" He was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Then, "I rode into Redemption today to pick up supplies. Stopped in at the Silver Dollar for a drink. I saw you working. Saw how exhausted you looked. Saw how Jack treated you." His hands tightened on the reins. "I told myself it wasn't my business. Told myself to mind my own affairs. But when I went to leave and saw him hitting you, I couldn't make myself walk out that door." "You could have," Lena said softly. "Everyone else did." "Maybe. But I've spent too many years watching people look the other way when someone needed help. Gets to a point where you have to decide what kind of man you're going to be." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and his expression was pained. "No one deserves what he was doing to you. No one. And if I'd walked away, I wouldn't have been able to live with myself." Lena felt something crack inside her chest, some hard protective shells she'd built around herself over the years. Tears spilled down her cheeks before she could stop them, hot and sudden. She turned her face away, embarrassed by the display of emotion, but Ethan didn't say anything. He just kept driving, giving her the space to fall apart. By the time they reached his ranch, Lena had cried herself dry. The house appeared out of the darkness like something from a dream, a sprawling wood frame structure with a wide porch and lamplight glowing in the windows. Beyond it she could make out the shapes of a barn, several outbuildings, and corrals where horses moved restlessly in the moonlight. It was modest by some standards, but to Lena, who'd spent the last 3 years in a cramped attic room, it looked like a palace. Ethan pulled the wagon to a stop and set the brake. "Wait here," he said, then disappeared into the house. Lena sat alone in the darkness, listening to the night sounds of the ranch, the soft nickering of horses, the distant howl of a coyote, the whisper of wind through grass. She felt untethered, as though the last threads connecting her to her old life had finally snapped. She had no idea what tomorrow would bring. The door opened and a woman emerged, the cook, Maria, Lena assumed. She was exactly as Ethan had described, gray-haired, square-shouldered, with a face that suggested she'd seen everything and been impressed by none of it. She approached the wagon with a lamp held high, studying Lena with shrewd eyes. "Dios mío," she muttered, then called back toward the house. "Ethan, what did you bring home this time?" "Someone who needs help," Ethan said, reappearing behind her. Maria made a disapproving noise but extended her hand to Lena. "Come, Nina, let's get you inside. You look like death warmed over." With Maria on one side and Ethan on the other, Lena made it into the house. The interior was warm and simply furnished. A large main room with a stone fireplace, a kitchen area, a hallway leading to what she assumed were bedrooms. It smelled of wood smoke and coffee and something baking. It smelled like a home. Maria guided her to a chair near the fire and disappeared, returning moments later with a basin of warm water and clean cloths. She began cleaning the blood from Lena's face with gentle efficiency, clucking her tongue at each new bruise. "Men," she muttered. "Animals. You're lucky Ethan found you when he did." "I know," Lena whispered. Ethan had retreated to the other side of the room, giving them space. He stood with his back to the fire, his hat in his hands, watching the proceedings with a troubled expression. When Maria had finished cleaning Lena's wounds, she produced a jar of salve and began applying it to the worst of the bruises. "This will help with the swelling. You'll be sore for a few days, but nothing's broken. You're tougher than you look, Nina." "Thank you," Lena managed. Maria waved the gratitude away. "Thank Ethan. He's the one who brought you here. I'm just the one who has to fix you up." But there was warmth beneath the gruffness, a kindness that reminded Lena of her own mother, dead these 10 years. When the ministrations were finally finished, Maria stood. "There's a room at the end of the hall. It's small, but it's clean, and it's yours. I'll bring you something to eat. Don't argue. You need food. And then you sleep. Everything else can wait until morning." She bustled off, leaving Lena alone with Ethan. The silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken questions and the crackle of the fire. Finally, Lena found her voice. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to thank me. You paid $300 for a stranger. You brought me to your home. You're offering me work and safety and—" Her voice broke. "No one's ever done anything like that for me before." Ethan crossed the room and knelt beside her chair, bringing himself to eye level. His expression was serious, but not unkind. "Listen to me, Lena. What happened tonight? What's been happening to you? It's not right, and it's not normal, no matter how common it might be out here. You don't owe me gratitude for treating you like a human being. That should be the baseline, not the exception. But no buts. You're safe here. You'll work, same as everyone else on this ranch. You'll earn your keep and your wages, but you'll do it without fear, without someone raising a hand to you, without being treated like property." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "I can't undo what's been done to you, but I can make damn sure it doesn't happen again. Not while I'm breathing." Lena searched his face, looking for the lie, the angle, the trap. She found none. Ethan Cole, this stranger who'd walked into her nightmare and dragged her out of it, was exactly what he appeared to be. A decent man in an indecent world. It was so rare it felt like a miracle. Maria returned with a plate of food, bread, cheese, cold chicken, and a cup of hot tea. She set it on the small table beside Lena's chair and pointed at it meaningfully. "Eat. All of it. Your skin and bones." Lena obeyed, though she hadn't thought she was hungry. The moment the food touched her tongue, though, her body woke up with urgent demands. She ate slowly, savoring each bite, while Maria and Ethan moved around the kitchen cleaning up the evening's dishes. It was so normal, so domestic, so far removed from the chaos of the silver dollar that Lena felt like she'd stepped into someone else's life. When she'd finished eating, Maria showed her to her room. It was indeed small, barely larger than the attic space she'd shared with 3 other girls, but it was hers alone. There was a narrow bed with a quilt, a dresser, a washstand with a pitcher and basin, and a window that looked out over the dark prairie. After years of sleeping in a room where you could hear every cough, every nightmare, every intimate sound from the saloon below, the silence was overwhelming. "Rest," Maria commanded, pulling back the quilt. "Tomorrow, we talk about work. Tonight, you heal." Lena changed into a nightgown Maria had provided, too big but clean and soft, and climbed into bed. The mattress was thin but infinitely better than what she'd had before. As Maria extinguished the lamp and left, pulling the door closed behind her, Lena lay in the darkness and waited for reality to assert itself. This couldn't be real. This couldn't last. Something would go wrong. Someone would take it away. But as exhaustion finally claimed her and she drifted towards sleep, she allowed herself to believe, just for a moment, that maybe, just maybe, her life had finally changed. In the main room, Ethan stood by the dying fire, staring into the flames. Maria joined him, drying her hands on her apron. "That girl's been through hell," she said quietly. "I know. You sure you know what you're doing, bringing her here?" Ethan was silent for a long moment. "No," he finally admitted, but leaving her there wasn't an option. Maria studied his profile, her expression softening. "You've got a good heart, Ethan Cole. Sometimes I think it's too good for this world. The world doesn't get better because good people do nothing." "No," Maria agreed. "I suppose it doesn't." She patted his shoulder. "Get some rest. Morning comes early, and that girl's going to need all the support we can give her." After Maria had gone to her own quarters, Ethan remained by the fire. He thought about Lena more, about the fear in her eyes when Jack Thornton had raised his fist, about the resignation that had settled over the other patrons of the silver dollar, about the way she'd looked at him in the wagon, as though kindness was something foreign and suspect. He thought about the promise he'd made. "No more hands will ever touch you." It was a bold claim, maybe even an arrogant one, but Ethan had meant every word. He'd stood by too many times in his life, watched too many injustices unfold without intervention. Tonight, he'd drawn a line. And whatever came next, whether Lena stayed or left, whether she healed or remained broken, at least he'd done something. At least he'd tried. As the fire burned down to embers and the night deepened around the ranch, Ethan Cole made himself a second promise. He would protect Lena Moore from anyone who tried to hurt her, even if it cost him everything. Morning arrived with the crow of a rooster and pale sunlight streaming through the window. Lena woke disoriented, her body screaming in protest as she tried to move. For a confused moment, she didn't know where she was. The bed was unfamiliar, the silence too complete. Then memory returned in a rush. The beating, the stranger, the promise of safety. She sat up slowly, cataloging the damage. Her ribs were tender but not broken. Her face felt swollen, and when she touched her cheek, she winced. The bruises had ripened overnight into spectacular shades of purple and yellow. She looked, she imagined, like she'd been trampled by horses. A soft knock at the door made her jump. "You awake in there?" Maria's voice, gruff but not unkind. "Yes, ma'am." "Good. Get dressed. Breakfast is in 10 minutes, and on this ranch we don't waste daylight." Lena found her dress from the previous night folded on the dresser, cleaned and mended where Jack's violence had torn it. Beside it lay a simple work dress in dark blue calico, newer than anything she'd owned in years. She ran her fingers over the fabric, smooth and sturdy, then dressed quickly. The new dress fit reasonably well, though it was a bit loose in places. She'd lost weight over the past year, her body consuming itself to keep pace with the endless demands placed upon it. When she emerged into the main room, she found Maria setting plates on a rough-hewn table. The kitchen smelled of coffee, bacon, and fresh bread. Lena's stomach growled despite her nervousness. "Sit," Maria commanded, gesturing to a chair. "You need meat on those bones." Lena obeyed, still uncertain of her place in this household. Maria filled a plate with more food than Lena had seen in a single meal for months. Eggs, bacon, fried potatoes, thick slices of bread with butter and jam. She set it down with a decisive thunk. "Eat." "This is too much. Did I ask your opinion? Eat." Lena ate, and Maria watched with satisfaction as color slowly returned to the girl's pale face. After a few minutes, the back door opened and Ethan entered, followed by 3 men Lena didn't recognize. They were weathered and work-worn, their clothes dusty from the morning's chores. Ethan's eyes found Lena immediately. "How are you feeling?" "Better, thank you." It wasn't entirely true, but it seemed like the right thing to say. He nodded, then gestured to his companions. "Lena, these are my hands, Charlie Peters, Tom Whitlock, and James Running Deer. Gentlemen, this is Lena Moore. She'll be working here from now on." The 3 men touched their hat brims in greeting. Charlie was older, perhaps 50, with a graying beard and kind eyes. Tom was younger, barely out of his teens, with an eager expression. James was somewhere in between, his features suggesting both white and native heritage, his gaze steady and measuring. "Ma'am," Charlie said, his voice soft. "Welcome to the Cole Ranch." "Thank you," Lena managed, acutely aware of her bruised face and the questions these men must have. But none of them asked. They simply took their seats at the table, and Maria served them with the same brisk efficiency she'd shown Lena. The conversation flowed around mundane topics: cattle that needed moving to summer pasture, a fence that required mending, supplies that needed ordering from town. It was the familiar rhythm of working people, comfortable in their routines. Lena found herself relaxing incrementally, though she remained on guard. Trust was not something that came easily after 3 years of learning that kindness usually had a price. After breakfast, Maria shooed the men out and turned to Lena. "Can you cook?" "Some. Basic things." "Can you clean?" "Yes, ma'am." "So?" "Yes." Maria nodded, her shrewd eyes taking Lena's measure. "Good. For now, you'll help me with the house. Cooking, cleaning, laundry, mending. Later, if you want to learn ranch work, the men can teach you. But first, you heal. Understood?" "Yes, ma'am." "And stop calling me ma'am. Makes me feel ancient." "Maria is fine." A ghost of a smile touched Lena's lips. "Yes, Maria." The work began immediately. Despite Maria's insistence that Lena should take it easy, there was no shortage of tasks. The ranch house required constant maintenance: floors to sweep, dishes to wash, bread to bake, clothes to mend. But unlike the frantic, fearful labor at the Silver Dollar, this work had a different quality. It was purposeful without being desperate. Maria worked alongside her, showing rather than ordering, correcting without cruelty. You've done hard labor before, Maria observed as they kneaded bread dough together. I can tell by your hands. Lena looked down at her roughened palms, the calluses and small scars. The saloon kept me busy. That man who beat you, he was your employer? He owned my father's debts. When my father died, the debts became mine. Maria's mouth tightened. Debt slavery. It has many names, but it's all the same evil. She punched the dough with unnecessary force. Men like that should be horsewhipped. Ethan paid him $300 last night. For my freedom. I know. He told me. Maria glanced at Lena. You wondering what he expects in return? The question hung between them, heavy with implications. Lena chose her words carefully. It seems too generous to ask for nothing. Ethan Cole is many things, Nina, but he's not like other men. He doesn't collect debts against people. He doesn't trade in obligations. Maria shaped the dough into loaves with practiced efficiency. You want to know his story? Lena did, desperately, but she wasn't sure it was her place to ask. Maria told her anyway. Ethan's father owned this ranch before him, built it from nothing, turned it into something prosperous. But he was a hard man, cruel when he drank, which was often. Ethan's mother died when he was young, some say from a broken heart, some say from a broken body. Either way, his father's fists were involved. Maria's voice was matter-of-fact, relating history rather than gossip. Ethan grew up watching his father terrorize everyone around him. Ranch hands who spoke back got beaten. Neighbors who disagreed got threatened. The whole territory knew what kind of man Jacob Cole was. Lena listened, beginning to understand. When Ethan was 17, his father came home drunk and started on one of the hired girls. Beat her badly, might have killed her if Ethan hadn't stepped in. They fought, father and son. And when it was over, Jacob Cole was on the ground with a broken jaw and 3 cracked ribs. Ethan told him if he ever raised his hand to another person on that ranch, he'd finish what he started. Maria placed the loaves in the oven. Jacob died 2 years later. Some said it was his liver giving out. Some said it was a broken spirit. But by then, Ethan had already taken over running the place, and he swore he'd never be like his father, that this ranch would be different. How long ago was that? 10 years, give or take. And in all that time, Ethan's kept his word. He pays fair wages, treats people with respect, doesn't tolerate violence or cruelty. It's made him some enemies, men who think he's too soft, too progressive, but it's also made him loyal friends. Maria fixed Lena with a steady gaze. So when I tell you Ethan doesn't want anything from you except honest work, I mean it. He spent his whole life trying to be the opposite of his father. Your safety isn't a transaction. It's a principle. Lena felt something loosen in her chest, a knot of fear she'd been carrying since the previous night. Thank you for telling me. Just wanted you to understand the kind of man you're working for. Now, let's get these dishes done. The men will be back for lunch before you know it. The days settled into a pattern. Lena rose with the sun, helped Maria prepare breakfast, then spent her mornings on household tasks. The work was demanding, but not crushing. Maria was exacting in her standards, but patient in her teaching. Slowly, Lena's body began to heal. The bruises faded from purple to green to yellow, then disappeared entirely. The ache in her ribs subsided. She began to sleep through the night without waking in panic. Ethan kept his distance, treating her with the same courteous respect he showed everyone on the ranch. He never asked about her past, never pressed for details about her time at the Silver Dollar. When they spoke, it was about practical matters. Whether she needed anything, how she was settling in, if Maria was working her too hard. She's not, Lena assured him one afternoon. They were on the porch, Ethan cleaning tack while Lena mended one of his shirts. Maria's been very kind. Good. He worked leather oil into a bridle with steady, methodical movements. You're earning your keep. Don't let anyone tell you different. I barely know what I'm doing half the time. That's what learning looks like. He glanced at her, a slight smile touching his lips. Maria says you've got good instincts. High praise from her. Lena ducked her head, unused to compliments. I'm trying. That's all anyone can ask. They worked in companionable silence for a while, the afternoon sun warm on the porch boards. Lena found herself stealing glances at Ethan, trying to reconcile the quiet, gentle man beside her with the one who'd threatened to burn down Jack Thornton's saloon. There was steel beneath his calm exterior, a capacity for violence held in careful check. But unlike the men she'd known before, Ethan's strength wasn't used to intimidate or control. It was reserved for protection. "Can I ask you something?" The words were out before she could stop them. "Of course." "Why did you really step in that night? Maria told me about your father, about what you saw growing up. But there are people suffering all over this territory. You can't save them all." Ethan was quiet for a long moment, his hands stilling on the leather. "No," he finally said. "I can't. But I was there. I saw what was happening, and I had the means to stop it. Those three things don't line up very often." He met her eyes. "My father used to say that what happened in a man's house was his own business, that neighbors should mind their affairs. I watched good people stand by while he hurt my mother, hurt the people who worked for us because they believed that lie. I swore I'd never be one of those people. But $300 is just money. I've got enough to run this ranch and pay my people. What I couldn't afford was to walk away and spend the rest of my life wondering what happened to you." His expression softened. "You're not a burden, Lena. And you don't owe me your gratitude. You owe yourself the chance to build a life that doesn't involve being beaten for falling asleep after a 20-hour shift." Lena's throat tightened. "No one's ever talked to me the way you do, like I'm a person who matters." "That's because you are a person who matters, and anyone who made you believe different was lying to you." She had to look away then, blinking against the sudden sting of tears. 3 weeks on this ranch, and she still wasn't used to kindness without conditions. It felt fragile, temporary, like something that could be snatched away at any moment. As if sensing her thoughts, Ethan spoke again. "You're safe here, Lena. That's not going to change. Not today, not next week, not next year. This is your home for as long as you want it to be." The words settled over her like a blanket, warm and solid. She nodded, not trusting her voice, and returned to her mending. But something had shifted between them, an understanding, an acknowledgement of the unspoken promise that had brought her here. The following Sunday, Ethan announced that he needed to make a trip to Redemption for supplies. Lena felt her stomach clench at the mention of the town. "I'll be gone most of the day," he said at breakfast. "Charlie and Tom are riding with me. James will stay here with you and Maria." "Is that necessary?" Lena asked quietly. Ethan's gaze was steady. "Jack Thornton's a bully and a drunk, but he's not stupid. He knows better than to come out here. Still, I'd rather not take chances." The fact that he'd considered the possibility at all made Lena's anxiety spike. She'd been so focused on settling into ranch life that she'd almost forgotten the threat Jack represented. Almost. After the men left, Maria set Lena to work preparing preserves from early berries. It was repetitive, soothing work, and the kitchen filled with the sweet smell of cooking fruit. James checked on them periodically, his rifle always within reach. But the day passed uneventfully. Ethan returned just before sunset, his wagon loaded with flour, sugar, coffee, and other staples. He also brought mail and newspapers from town. That evening, after dinner, he lingered at the table instead of retreating to his study as usual. "Saw some people in town today," he said casually, but Lena could hear the tension beneath his words. Word's gotten around about what happened at the Silver Dollar. Lena's pulse quickened. "What are they saying?" "Mixed reactions. Some folks think I overstepped. Others think it was about time someone stood up to Jack." He paused. "Jack himself is telling anyone who'll listen that you'll be back within a month, begging for your old job." Anger flared in Lena's chest, hot and sudden. "I'd rather starve." "Won't come to that," Ethan said firmly. "But I wanted you to know people are talking. If you go into town—" "I won't," Lena said quickly. "I don't need to go to town." Ethan studied her for a moment. "You can't hide here forever, Lena. Eventually, you'll want to see other people, go to the mercantile, maybe attend a social event. This is your home, but it shouldn't be your prison." "It's not a prison. It's the first place I felt safe in 3 years." "I know, and I'm glad. But Jack Thornton doesn't get to take the whole town away from you. He's already taken enough." Maria, who'd been listening from her rocking chair, spoke up. "The boy's right, Nina. You let fear control you, and you're still in that saloon, just a different kind of cage." Lena knew they were right, but the thought of facing the people of redemption, the ones who'd watched Jack beat her, who'd done nothing, made her feel sick. "I'm not ready." "That's fine," Ethan said gently. "No one's pushing you. I just wanted you to know that when you are ready, I'll go with you. You won't face them alone." The offer was so unexpected, so generous, that Lena found herself blinking back tears for the second time that week. "Thank you." As spring gave way to early summer, Lena found her place in the rhythm of ranch life. She learned to bake bread that rose properly, to mend shirts so the stitches didn't show, to read the weather by the color of the sky at dawn. Maria taught her to make tortillas and spicy stews that made the men sweat and reach for water. Charlie showed her how to tend the vegetable garden. Tom, with his endless enthusiasm, tried to teach her to rope fence posts, though she was terrible at it. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, she began to change. The constant tension she'd carried for years began to ease. She stopped flinching when people moved too quickly. She laughed at Tom's jokes and argued with Maria about the proper way to fold sheets. She slept deeply and dreamlessly, her body finally catching up on years of exhaustion. One evening, about 6 weeks after her arrival, Lena was helping Charlie feed the horses when he paused in his work. "You're different," he observed, his tone conversational. "Different how?" "Lighter. Like you're not carrying the world on your shoulders anymore." He stroked the nose of a bay mare. "When you first got here, you looked like you expected the sky to fall any minute. Now you look like you might actually believe tomorrow's going to come." Lena considered this. "I think I'm starting to." "Good. You deserve peace, Miss Lena. We all do, but especially you." The kindness in his voice made her eyes sting. These men, these rough-weathered cowboys who worked from dawn to dusk, had accepted her without question, treated her with unfailing respect. It was such a stark contrast to the silver dollar that sometimes Lena felt like she was living in two different worlds. "Charlie," she said impulsively, "what do you think of Ethan? As a boss, I mean." Charlie smiled, the expression crinkling the corners of his eyes. "Ethan Cole's the best man I've ever worked for, and I've worked for plenty. He's fair, he's honest, and he doesn't ask anything of his people he wouldn't do himself. Works harder than any of us, pays better than most, and treats everyone like they matter." He patted the horse's neck. "Some bosses see their hands as tools. Ethan sees them as people, makes all the difference." "He paid $300 for my freedom," Lena said quietly. "I still don't entirely understand why." "Because he could, and because it was the right thing to do. That's how Ethan thinks, sees a problem, finds a solution, doesn't waste time on whether it's convenient." Charlie's expression grew serious. "But I'll tell you something else, Miss Lena. In all the years I've known him, I've never seen Ethan bring someone home like he brought you. He's helped people before, found jobs for folks down on their luck, paid for a doctor when someone couldn't afford it. But bringing you here, giving you a place in his household? That's different." "Different how?" Charlie seemed to choose his words carefully. "Like, maybe he sees something in you worth protecting, worth investing in. And before you say it's just charity, consider this. Ethan doesn't do things halfway. If he's decided you belong here, then you belong here. Simple as that." The conversation stayed with Lena long after they'd finished with the horses. That night, lying in her narrow bed and listening to the prairie wind, she thought about belonging, about home, about the way Ethan looked at her sometimes when he thought she wasn't paying attention, not with pity or desire, but with something that looked almost like hope. She thought about the promise he'd made that first night. "No more hands will ever touch you." He'd kept that promise. More than that, he'd given her the space to heal, to find her footing, to remember who she was beyond the fear and exhaustion. And slowly, hesitantly, Lena was beginning to believe that this life, this strange, unexpected second chance, might actually be real. The challenge came on a sweltering afternoon in mid-July. Lena was alone in the house, Maria having gone to visit a sick friend in a neighboring homestead. The men were out working the far pastures, not expected back until sunset. Lena had been enjoying the rare solitude, baking pies for supper and humming to herself. The knock at the door startled her. She wiped her flour-dusted hands on her apron and went to answer it, expecting perhaps a neighbor or a traveling peddler. Instead, she found herself face to face with a man from town, Henry Walsh, who worked at the assayer's office. She'd seen him at the Silver Dollar occasionally, though he'd never caused her trouble. "Miss Moore," he said, touching his hat brim. His horse stood tied at the porch rail, steam rising from its flanks. "Mr. Walsh, can I help you?" He shifted uncomfortably. "I've got a message from Jack Thornton. He wants to talk to you. Says it's important." Lena's blood ran cold. "I have nothing to say to Jack Thornton." "He said you'd say that. Asked me to tell you he's willing to forget the past, let bygones be bygones. Says there's no hard feelings about what happened, and he'd like to discuss you coming back to work. With better terms this time." "No?" The word came out flat and final. "Miss Moore, I'm just the messenger. Then take this message back to Mr. Thornton. I will never work for him again, not under any terms, not for any amount of money. Tell him to leave me alone." Walsh looked pained. "He's not going to like that answer." "I don't care what he likes. He said if you refused, I should remind you that you've still got friends in town, girls you worked with at the saloon. He wouldn't want anything unfortunate to happen to them on account of your stubbornness." The threat was barely veiled, and it made Lena's hand shake with rage rather than fear. "Jack Thornton is a coward who hides behind threats to women. You tell him that if he touches those girls because of me, there will be consequences." "What kind of consequences? You're just a—" He stopped himself, but the damage was done. "Just a what, Mr. Walsh? A saloon girl? A woman with no power?" Lena stepped forward, and something in her expression made the man take an involuntary step back. "I may not have power, but Ethan Cole does. And I promise you, if Jack hurts anyone because of me, Ethan will make him regret it." Walsh's eyes widened slightly. Whatever he'd expected, it wasn't this. The beaten, broken girl from the Silver Dollar had been replaced by someone who'd found her spine. "I'll deliver your message," he said stiffly, then turned and mounted his horse. Lena watched him ride away, her heart hammering. The moment he disappeared from view, her legs gave out, and she sank onto the porch steps, trembling with delayed reaction. She'd stood up to Jack's messenger, but the encounter had shaken her more than she wanted to admit. The reminder that Jack was still out there, still angry, still capable of reaching her, made the safety of the ranch feel suddenly fragile. When Ethan returned that evening and she told him what had happened, his expression turned thunderous. "He threatened you," Ethan said, his voice dangerously quiet. "He threatened the other girls at the saloon, to get to me." "Same thing." Ethan paced the main room like a caged animal. "That son of a—" He stopped himself, visibly forcing calm. "Did Walsh say anything else?" "Just that Jack wanted me back. With better terms, whatever that means. It means he's losing money without you. The Silver Dollar's reputation was built partly on the girls who worked there, and you were one of his most reliable. He wants you back under his control." Maria, who'd returned just before Ethan, spoke from her chair. "The man's a fool if he thinks threats will work. Lena's not the scared girl she was 2 months ago." "No," Ethan agreed, looking at Lena with something like pride. "She's not. But Jack doesn't know that yet, which makes him dangerous." "What do we do?" Lena asked. Ethan was quiet for a moment, thinking. "Tomorrow, I'm going into town. I'm going to make it very clear to Jack Thornton that any further contact with you, direct or indirect, will be met with legal action. And if that doesn't work, I'll find other ways to make my point. He'll just deny sending Walsh. Probably, but it doesn't matter. What matters is that he knows I'm watching, and I'm not going to let him intimidate you." Ethan knelt in front of Lena's chair, his gray eyes intense. "Listen to me. You are under my protection." "That's not just words. That means something in this territory. Jack knows it, even if he's too proud to admit it. He won't risk open confrontation with me. But the other girls, I'll check on them too. Make sure they're safe. If any of them want to leave the Silver Dollar, I'll help them find other work." He took her hand, his grip warm and solid. "You're not responsible for Jack's cruelty, Lena. Whatever he does, it's on him, not you." Lena wanted to believe him, but guilt gnawed at her. Those girls had been her friends, or as close to friends as you could have in a place like that. If Jack took his anger out on them— "I should have stayed," she whispered. "No." Ethan's voice was firm. "You should never have been there in the first place. And you're sure as hell not going back." The next morning, Ethan rode into Redemption with Charlie and James flanking him. Lena watched from the porch as they disappeared down the road, anxiety knotting her stomach. Maria stood beside her, a reassuring presence. "They'll be fine," Maria said. "Ethan knows how to handle men like Thornton. I'm afraid of what might happen. Fear's natural, but you can't let it rule you." Maria squeezed her shoulder. "Come, let's make ourselves useful while we wait." The hours crawled by. Lena tried to focus on her work, bread to knead, floors to sweep, vegetables to chop for stew. But her mind kept circling back to redemption. What was Ethan saying to Jack? Would there be violence? Would he come back? It was late afternoon when the sound of hoofbeats announced their return. Lena rushed to the window and felt relief flood through her when she saw all three riders safe and whole. She forced herself to wait on the porch rather than running to meet them, maintaining at least a veneer of composure. Ethan dismounted and handed his reins to Tom, who'd emerged from the barn. He climbed the porch steps, his expression unreadable. "Is everything all right?" Lena asked. "It is now." Ethan's jaw was tight. "I had a conversation with Jack. Made my position clear. He won't be bothering you again." "What did you say to him?" "That any further contact with you would be considered harassment, and I'd bring the marshal into it. Also reminded him that I've got friends in the territorial government who might be interested in how he runs his business, the debts he keeps people in, the working conditions, the violence. Jack's operation wouldn't hold up to legal scrutiny, and he knows it." "And he agreed?" "He blustered and threatened, but yes, eventually." Ethan's expression softened. "I also spoke to the girls at the saloon. Checked on them personally. They're fine, Lena. Jack's angry, but he's not stupid enough to hurt them when he knows I'm watching." The relief was overwhelming. Lena felt her knees go weak, and Ethan caught her elbow, steadying her. "It's over," he said quietly. "You're safe. They're safe. Jack Thornton has no power over you anymore." Lena looked up at him, this man who'd walked into her nightmare and torn it apart with his bare hands. "Why do you keep doing this? Protecting me? Fighting my battles?" "They're not your battles alone. Not anymore." His hand was still on her arm, warm through the fabric of her sleeve. "And I keep doing it because—" He stopped, seemed to reconsider his words. "Because it's the right thing to do. Because you deserve someone in your corner. Because I—" He didn't finish the sentence, but something in his eyes made Lena's breath catch. For a moment, they stood frozen on the porch, the air between them charged with unspoken words. Then Maria's voice called from inside, "Are you two going to stand there all day, or are you going to eat the supper that's getting cold?" And the moment broke. Ethan stepped back, clearing his throat. "We should go in." "Yes," Lena agreed, her voice barely above a whisper. But as they moved toward the door, she felt the shift between them, subtle as morning light, but unmistakable. Something was growing here, something neither of them had named yet, something that felt like hope, like possibility, like the promise of a future she'd never dared to imagine. That night, lying in her bed, Lena thought about Ethan's unfinished sentence. Because he what? Cared about her? Felt responsible? Or something more? She wasn't sure she was ready for the answer, but for the first time in her life, she was brave enough to ask the question. Summer deepened into August, and the work on the ranch intensified with the approaching cattle drive. Ethan would be taking a herd to market in Denver, a journey that would keep him away for nearly 3 weeks. The prospect filled Lena with an anxiety she tried unsuccessfully to hide. "You'll be fine," Ethan assured her one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. "James will be here, and Charlie's staying back to manage things. Tom's going with me, but you'll have plenty of protection." "I know," Lena said, though her hands twisted in her lap. "It's just, I've gotten used to you being here." The admission hung between them, more revealing than she'd intended. Ethan looked at her, his expression unreadable in the fading light. "I've gotten used to being here too," he said quietly. "Used to seeing you at breakfast, hearing you laugh at Maria's stories, watching you become the person you were always meant to be." He paused, seeming to weigh his next words carefully. "These past few months, having you here, it's changed things for me." Lena's heart hammered against her ribs. "Changed things how?" But before he could answer, Maria appeared at the door. "Ethan, Charlie needs you in the barn. Something about the tack for the drive." The moment shattered like glass. Ethan stood, his expression rueful. "We'll talk when I get back," he promised, then disappeared into the gathering darkness. Lena sat alone on the porch, Maria's knowing gaze heavy on her back. After a moment, the older woman settled into the chair Ethan had vacated. "You care about him," Maria said. It wasn't a question. Lena stopped, uncertain how to finish that sentence. "He saved my life." "That's not what I asked." Lena was quiet for a long moment, watching the first stars emerge in the darkening sky. "I don't know what I feel," she finally admitted. "Gratitude, certainly. Respect. But sometimes when he looks at me, I feel—" She broke off, shaking her head. "It doesn't matter. I'm not foolish enough to think a man like Ethan Cole would want anything more from me than honest work." "Nina," Maria said with exasperated affection, "for someone who survived 3 years in a saloon, you can be remarkably blind. That man looks at you like you hung the moon, has since the day he brought you home. He looks at me like he feels responsible for me. That's different." "Is it?" Maria stood, brushing off her skirts. "Maybe you should ask him when he gets back. Might get an answer that surprises you." The cattle drive departed 3 days later in a cloud of dust and the bellowing of anxious steers. Lena stood on the porch, watching the procession disappear over the eastern hills, Ethan at the lead, Tom riding beside him, both of them dwarfed by the mass of livestock. Ethan had turned in his saddle one last time before dropping out of sight, his hand raised in farewell. Lena had waved back, trying to ignore the hollow feeling in her chest. "He'll be back before you know it," Charlie said, coming to stand beside her. 3 weeks isn't so long." But 3 weeks felt like an eternity. The ranch settled into a quieter rhythm, with half its people gone. Charlie managed the day-to-day operations with practiced efficiency. James took on extra patrols, his rifle always within reach. Maria kept Lena busy with endless tasks, preserving vegetables from the garden, sewing winter clothes, preparing for the lean months ahead. The work was good, purposeful, but it couldn't entirely distract Lena from counting the days until Ethan's return. A week passed without incident. Then another. Lena began to relax, telling herself that her fears were unfounded. Jack Thornton had been quiet since Ethan's confrontation. There was no reason to expect trouble. She should have known better. It was the 13th day of Ethan's absence when everything went wrong. The afternoon had been oppressively hot, the kind of heat that made even breathing feel like work. Charlie had ridden out to check the water levels in the creek, leaving James and Maria at the main house with Lena. They'd just finished an early supper when James stiffened, his head cocking toward the window. "Someone's coming," he said, his hand moving to his rifle. "Multiple riders." Lena's stomach dropped. "How many?" "3, maybe 4. James moved to the window, staying to the side so he wouldn't be visible from outside. "They're not in any hurry, riding straight up the road like they've got every right to be here." Maria was already moving, herding Lena toward the back of the house. "Into my room. Lock the door and don't come out until I say." "I'm not hiding while—" "You're doing exactly what I tell you," Maria said firmly. "James and I can handle this, but not if we're worried about keeping you safe. Now go." Lena went, her hand shaking as she locked Maria's bedroom door behind her. She pressed her ear against the wood, straining to hear what was happening in the main room. The sound of horses drawing close. Voices, rough and male. Then Maria's sharp tone cutting through. "This is private property. State your business or move along." "We're here to see Lena Moore." The voice was slurred, thick with whiskey, but still recognizable. "Jack Thornton." "No, she's here. Saw Cole leave with his herd last week. Figured it was time to collect what's mine." "Miss Moore doesn't belong to you," James said, his voice level but hard. "Mr. Cole paid her debts. She's a free woman working for fair wages." "Free woman." Jack's laugh was ugly. "That what Cole told you? That girl owes me 3 years of her life, 3 years of work I'll never get back. That debt can't be paid with money." "The law says different," Maria snapped. "And you're trespassing. You've got 10 seconds to get off this property before I fetch the marshal." "Marshal's 2 hours away, old woman. And by the time he gets here, we'll be long gone. With what we came for." The sound of boots on the porch steps made Lena's blood run cold. She looked around Maria's room desperately, searching for anything that could serve as a weapon. Her eyes landed on a heavy iron poker by the small fireplace. She grabbed it, her palms slick with sweat. Take another step and I'll drop you where you stand. James's voice, cold as winter. I'm a better shot than you are drunk, Thornton. Test me if you want. You're 1 man against 4. You like those odds? Better than yours, because even if you get past me, you've still got to answer to Ethan Cole when he gets back. You think he's going to let you walk away after you came to his home and threatened his people? There was a pause. Lena could imagine Jack's alcohol-fogged brain trying to work through the implications. He was a bully, but he wasn't completely stupid. Ethan's reputation carried weight in this territory. But then another voice spoke up, younger and more reckless. Hell with Cole. He ain't here and we are. Let's just take the girl and go. Shut up, Donnie, Jack growled. Why? You've been talking about this for weeks. How she embarrassed you, cost you money, needs to be taught a lesson. Well, here's your chance. Cole's gone. It's just one Indian and an old Mexican woman. What are they going to do? The racial slurs made Lena's hands clench around the poker. She heard James's sharp intake of breath, saw in her mind how his finger would be tightening on the trigger. Last warning, James said. Leave now, while you still can. Or what? You'll shoot all 4 of us before we... The crack of the rifle was deafening even through the closed door. Lena heard a man scream, heard the chaos of horses spooked by gunfire, heard Maria shouting something in rapid Spanish. More gunshots, different weapons now. The deeper boom of a shotgun mixing with the sharper reports of pistols. The door shuddered as something heavy hit it from the outside. Without thinking, Lena unlocked the door and yanked it open. The main room was a scene of controlled chaos. James had taken cover behind the overturned table, his rifle smoking. One of Jack's men was on the floor, clutching his leg, blood seeping between his fingers. Maria stood by the kitchen with her late husband's shotgun, her face set in grim determination. And Jack Thornton himself was trying to drag himself back toward the door, his earlier bravado evaporated in the face of real resistance. But a 4th man, young Donnie, by the sound of his voice, had circled around during the confusion. He burst through the back door just as Lena emerged from Maria's room, his eyes wild and his pistol drawn. There you are, he said, grabbing her arm with bruising force. Come on, we're leaving. Lena didn't think. She swung the poker with all her strength, catching him across the forearm. Bone cracked, and Donnie howled, his pistol clattering to the floor. She hit him again, this time across the shoulders, and he went down hard. Don't you ever touch me, she heard herself say, her voice shaking with rage rather than fear. Don't you ever put your hands on me again. James was there in an instant, kicking the fallen pistol away and training his rifle on the groaning man. You all right, Miss Lena? I'm fine. She was surprised to find it was true. Her hands were steady, her breathing even. The terror she'd expected hadn't materialized. Instead, she felt a fierce, blazing anger. Is everyone else? We're good, Maria confirmed, keeping her shotgun trained on Jack and his wounded companion. Though these fools are going to wish they'd listened. Charlie chose that moment to thunder up on horseback, drawn by the sound of gunfire. He took in the scene with one comprehensive glance. The wounded men, the smoking weapons, Lena standing over Donnie with a poker, and his weathered face went hard. Someone want to tell me what happened here? Jack, realizing he was now outnumbered and outgunned, tried to bluster. This is a misunderstanding. We just came to talk to the girl. You came armed to a ranch where you weren't welcome and threatened the people living here, Charlie said flatly. That's not a misunderstanding. That's assault. Maybe attempted kidnapping. He dismounted and walked over to examine the man with the leg wound. James put this bullet in you? The man nodded, his face gray with pain. Good shot. Missed the artery, or you'd be dead already. Charlie straightened and looked at Jack with cold contempt. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to get your men and get off this property. Then you're going to stay away from here, away from Miss Moore, and away from everyone associated with Ethan Cole. Because when he hears about this, and he will hear about it, you want to be able to say you left peacefully and didn't cause any more trouble. That girl belongs... That girl, Charlie interrupted, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet, just defended herself against armed intruders. She's well within her rights to press charges. And if she does, you'll hang. All of you. Because Colorado territory doesn't take kindly to men who attack women and threaten homesteads. Jack's face cycled through several shades of red and purple, but he wasn't drunk enough to miss the truth in Charlie's words. He gestured to his men, and they began limping toward their horses, the wounded man supported between his companions. At the door, Jack turned back one last time. Cole can't protect her forever. He won't have to, Lena said, surprising herself. I can protect myself, as you just saw. Something flickered in Jack's eyes. Surprise, maybe, or the first hint of real fear. He'd expected the broken girl from the silver dollar, the one who'd taken his beatings without fighting back. This woman, standing tall with a poker in her hand and fire in her eyes, was someone different entirely. This isn't over, he muttered, but it sounded like an empty threat even to him. Yes, it is, James said. It's been over since the day Ethan Cole paid your blood money and took Miss Lena away from you. You just didn't have the sense to accept it. They watched from the porch as Jack and his men rode away, their retreat ignominious and angry. Only when they disappeared from sight did the adrenaline finally drain from Lena's body. She swayed and Maria caught her, guiding her to a chair. Easy, Nina. You're safe now. I hit him, Lena said wonderingly, looking at the poker still clutched in her hand. I hit him and I wasn't afraid. You were magnificent, Maria said proudly, like an avenging angel. Charlie was already moving, checking the damage to the house and assessing what needed to be done. James, ride to town and fetch the marshal. I want this on record. And send word to the Hendersons. See if anyone can ride out and intercept Ethan's drive. Let him know what happened. Already on it, James said, heading for the barn. Lena watched him go, reality settling over her like a heavy blanket. Ethan's going to be furious. Damn right he is, Charlie agreed. But not at you. Never at you. The marshal arrived the following afternoon, a grizzled man named Tom Hastings, who'd been keeping the peace and redemption for nearly a decade. He took statements from everyone, examined the bullet holes in the porch, and listened with a deepening frown as Charlie described the attack. Jack Thornton's been trouble for years, Hastings said, making notes in a small leather book. But this is the first time he's been stupid enough to attack someone's homestead in broad daylight. What will happen to him? Lena asked. That depends on whether you want to press charges, Miss Moore. Attempted kidnapping, assault, trespassing while armed. I can make a case for all of it, but you'd have to testify. The thought of facing Jack in court made Lena's stomach clench, but she forced herself to nod. I'll do it. He can't keep getting away with hurting people. Hastings looked at her with something like respect. That's brave of you. Takes guts to stand up to a man like Thornton. She's got plenty of guts, Maria said, her hand on Lena's shoulder. Proved that yesterday when she cracked that boy's arm like a twig. A small smile tugged at the marshal's mouth. Heard about that. Donnie Miller's over at the doc's place, crying like a baby. Says you came at him like a wildcat. I came at him like a woman defending herself, Lena corrected. Fair enough? Fair. Hastings closed his notebook. I'll ride back to town and start the paperwork. Jack's probably going to lawyer up, claim it was all a misunderstanding. But with the witnesses you've got and the physical evidence, I think we can make it stick. After the marshal left, the ranch settled into an uneasy calm. Charlie posted James on watch at night, taking shifts himself. Maria fussed over everyone, cooking elaborate meals and muttering in Spanish about foolish men and their foolish pride. And Lena found herself unable to sleep, lying awake in her room and replaying the attack over and over. She'd defended herself. She'd fought back. After years of taking abuse without resistance, she'd finally stood her ground and refused to be a victim. The realization was both empowering and terrifying, because it meant accepting that the scared girl from the silver dollar was gone, replaced by someone stronger, someone who would never again let a man like Jack Thornton dictate her fate. But it also meant acknowledging how much she'd changed since coming to this ranch. How much Ethan had changed her simply by treating her with dignity and showing her what safety felt like. And with that acknowledgement came a truth she could no longer avoid. She cared about him, not just with gratitude or respect, but with something deeper. Something that made her heart race when he smiled at her, that made her count the days until his return, that made the thought of him learning about the attack fill her with worry rather than relief. She was falling in love with Ethan Cole. The admission, even in the privacy of her own thoughts, was both exhilarating and terrifying, because loving someone meant being vulnerable in ways she'd sworn never to be again. It meant risking rejection, disappointment, heartbreak, all the things she'd armored herself against for so long. But as the night deepened and the stars wheeled overhead, Lena found she couldn't regret it. Loving Ethan felt right in a way nothing else in her life ever had. Like coming home after years of wandering. Like finding something precious she hadn't known she'd lost. Whether he felt the same way remained to be seen. But when he returned and learned what had happened, she would finally be brave enough to tell him the truth. Ethan made it back to the ranch in record time, having pushed his horse to the limit after James caught up with the drive and delivered the news. He arrived 5 days after the attack, dusty and exhausted and radiating barely controlled fury. Lena was in the kitchen helping Maria with supper when she heard the thunder of hoofbeats. She looked out the window and saw him dismounting before his horse had fully stopped, saw the rigid set of his shoulders and the grim line of his mouth. He burst through the door like a storm, his eyes immediately finding her. "Are you hurt?" "I'm fine," Lena said, though her heart was hammering. "Everyone's fine. We're all—" He crossed the room in 3 long strides and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. She felt him trembling, felt the rapid beat of his heart against her cheek, felt the fear and relief and rage radiating from him in waves. "When James told me what happened," he said against her hair, his voice rough. "When he said Thornton came here with armed men," he pulled back just enough to look at her, his hands framing her face. "I thought I'd lost you. I thought—" "I'm okay," Lena whispered, covering his hands with hers. "I promise. We fought them off. No one was seriously hurt except Jack's men. You shouldn't have had to fight them off. You shouldn't have been in danger in the first place." His gray eyes were fierce, swimming with emotions she couldn't quite name. "I should have been here. Should have protected you. You did protect me. You gave me a safe place, taught me I was worth defending. When Donnie grabbed me, I didn't freeze. I didn't surrender. I fought back because you showed me I could." She smiled tremulously. "You protected me by making me strong enough to protect myself." Something shifted in Ethan's expression. His thumbs traced gentle circles on her cheeks, his touch reverent despite the calluses. "You were always strong, Lena. I just gave you space to remember it." They stood frozen in that moment, the air between them electric with possibility. Maria had tactfully disappeared into the back room. The house was silent except for the tick of the clock and their mingled breathing. "Ethan," Lena began, trying to find the words for what she needed to say. But he spoke first, the words tumbling out as though he couldn't contain them any longer. "I was terrified. When James found us on the trail and told me what happened, I felt like my heart stopped. Not because of the ranch or the property or any of that. Because of you. Because the thought of losing you, of something happening to you while I was gone—" He stopped, his jaw working. "I care about you, Lena. More than I should, probably. More than is wise given everything you've been through. But I can't help it, and I can't pretend anymore that what I feel is just responsibility or duty or—" "Ethan," Lena interrupted gently. He stopped, looking at her with painful hope. "I care about you too," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I have for a while now. I was afraid to say it because I didn't know if you could ever see me as anything more than someone you rescued. But these past few months, you've become—" She paused, searching for the right words. "You've become the reason I wake up happy. The person I want to tell about my day. The face I look for first at breakfast. And when you left for the drive, I counted every day until you'd come back." Ethan's expression transformed, hope blooming into something radiant. "You mean that?" "Every word." He kissed her then, soft and careful and achingly sweet. It was nothing like the rough, demanding kisses she'd endured at the saloon. This was reverent, questioning, asking permission with every brush of lips. Lena melted into it, her hands fisting in his dusty shirt, her whole body singing with the rightness of it. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said simply. "I think I have since the moment I saw you standing up to Jack's messenger, refusing to be intimidated. Maybe even before that. Maybe since the night I brought you home and you looked at me like you couldn't believe kindness was real." Tears spilled down Lena's cheeks, but they were happy tears, joyful tears. "I love you too, and I'm not afraid anymore. Not of Jack, not of the future, not of this. Because I know that whatever comes, you'll be beside me. Always, Ethan promised, for as long as you'll have me. They kissed again, deeper this time, years of loneliness and fear dissolving in the warmth of finally being truly seen, truly known, truly loved. From the back room, Maria's voice called out, "About time you two figured it out. I was beginning to think I'd have to lock you in a room together." They broke apart laughing, foreheads still pressed together, hands intertwined. But the peace was short-lived. Charlie appeared at the door, his expression grim. "Ethan, you need to hear this. Just got word from town. Jack Thornton's filed countercharges. Says we attacked him and his men without provocation. Claims he was just visiting peacefully when James opened fire." Ethan's jaw tightened, but he didn't let go of Lena's hand. "That's a lie." "We know that. Marshall knows it too, but Jack's got money for lawyers, and he's spinning a story that might play well with certain folks in town. Folks who already think you're too progressive, too soft on your people." Bam. Charlie's tone made it clear what he thought of that attitude. "What do we do?" Lena asked. Ethan looked at her, his expression resolved. "We tell the truth. All of it. In court, in front of witnesses. We end this once and for all." He turned to Charlie. "When's the hearing?" "Week from Tuesday. Then we have time to prepare. I want statements from everyone who was here. I want the physical evidence documented, and I want to talk to every person in Redemption who's ever had a grievance with Jack Thornton." Ethan's voice was cold, determined. He wants a fight? He'll get one. But when it's over, he'll wish he'd left well enough alone. That night, after supper and strategy sessions, and checking on the ranch, Ethan walked Lena to her room. They stood in the hallway, reluctant to part despite the late hour. "Are you scared?" he asked. "About the trial?" "A little," Lena admitted, "but not as much as I would have been a few months ago, and not at all with you beside me. I'll be there every moment. And when it's over, when Jack's answered for what he's done," he paused, seeming to gather courage, "I'd like to court you properly. With your permission." Lena's smile was radiant. "You have it, though I think we're already past the courting stage, don't you?" "Maybe, but you deserve to be courted anyway. Flowers and rides and all the things you should have had from the beginning." His hand cupped her cheek. "You deserve everything good this world has to offer." "I already have it," she said softly. "I have you." They kissed goodnight sweetly, tenderly, and when Lena finally closed her door and leaned against it, she felt something she'd never expected to feel again. Hope. Pure and uncomplicated and bright as morning, the past had struck back, violent and vengeful. But for the first time, Lena wasn't afraid of it, because she'd faced it and survived, and because she wasn't alone anymore. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The week before the hearing passed in a flurry of preparation. Ethan barely slept, spending his evenings reviewing statements and consulting with anyone in the territory who'd had dealings with Jack Thornton. What he discovered painted an even uglier picture than he'd imagined. 3 other women, he told Lena on the Saturday before the trial, his voice tight with controlled anger. 3 other women who worked at the Silver Dollar under the same debt arrangements. One of them tried to leave 2 years ago. Jack had her arrested for theft, claimed she stole money from the till. She spent 6 months in jail before someone finally paid her fine. Lena felt sick. "Did you find her? Will she testify?" "She moved to Kansas after she got out. Wants nothing to do with Redemption or anything that reminds her of that time." Ethan's hands clenched on the papers before him. "Can't say I blame her, but it means we can't use her testimony." "What about the other 2? "Still working at the Silver Dollar, too afraid to speak up." He looked at her then, his expression haunted. "You were braver than you knew, Lena. Most people never escape men like Jack. They just endure until there's nothing left of who they were." "I had help," she said softly, moving to stand behind his chair. Her hand settled on his shoulders, feeling the tension knotted there. "I had you." He reached up to cover her hand with his. "And now I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of man Jack Thornton is, so he can never do this to anyone else." The night before the hearing, neither of them could sleep. Lena found Ethan on the porch near midnight, staring out at the dark prairie. She wrapped a shawl around her nightgown and joined him, settling into the chair beside his. "Nervous?" he asked. Terrified, she admitted. I'll have to face him tomorrow. Look him in the eye and tell a room full of people what he did to me, what he was trying to do. You don't have to do this. We could leave, start over somewhere else. Colorado's a big territory. Run away, you mean? Lena shook her head. I've been running my whole life, Ethan. Running from my father's debts, running from my own fear, running from the possibility that things could ever be different. I'm done running. Tomorrow, I stand my ground. Pride flashed across his face. You're the strongest person I've ever known. I'm the most terrified person you've ever known, but I'm doing it anyway. She reached for his hand, lacing their fingers together. And I can do it because you'll be there. Every second, he promised. And when it's over, when Jack's answered for what he's done, we'll move forward, together. Together, Lena echoed, the word feeling like a vow. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. The night was vast and dark, but Lena felt no fear. Not with Ethan's hand warm in hers, solid and real, and proof that some promises were worth keeping. The courthouse in Redemption was packed when they arrived Tuesday morning. It seemed like half the town had turned out, drawn by the spectacle of a prominent businessman facing charges brought by a former saloon girl. The whispers started the moment Lena walked through the door, Ethan's hand steady at the small of her back. That's her. Can't believe she's got the nerve to show her face. Pretty thing. Wonder what really happened out there. Lena kept her chin high and her eyes forward, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her flinch. She'd worn her best dress, a simple gray calico that Maria had helped her make, and pinned her hair back in a neat bun. She looked respectable, dignified, nothing like the exhausted girl who'd collapsed on the Silver Dollars floor 4 months ago. Jack sat at the defendant's table with his lawyer, a slick man from Denver named Cornelius Briggs, who'd made his reputation defending mining companies against injury claims. Jack's face was flushed, whether from anger or whiskey Lena couldn't tell. When he saw her, his expression twisted into something ugly. All rise for Judge Samuel Morrison, the bailiff called. The judge was a silver-haired man in his 60s, weathered by years on the frontier bench. He had a reputation for fairness, but also for impatience with foolishness. As he settled into his seat and surveyed the crowded courtroom, his mouth thinned with displeasure. This is a preliminary hearing, not a circus, he announced. Anyone who can't maintain proper decorum will be removed. Am I understood? The murmurs died immediately. Good. Mr. Hastings, you may proceed. Marshal Tom Hastings stood, laying out the charges in clear, precise language. Attempted kidnapping, assault, trespassing while armed, threatening a witness. The list was damning, and with each charge, the whispers in the courtroom grew louder until Judge Morrison's gavel cracked like a gunshot. I won't warn you again, he said coldly. Briggs stood, smoothing his expensive suit. Your Honor, my client contests every one of these charges. This is nothing more than a vindictive attempt to destroy a respected businessman's reputation. Mr. Thornton went to the Cole Ranch to discuss a legitimate business matter with Miss Moore and was met with unprovoked violence. Legitimate business matter, Ethan muttered beside Lena. That's rich. Mr. Cole, you'll have your chance to speak, the judge said, though his tone wasn't unkind. Mr. Briggs, your client and 3 armed men rode onto private property and, according to multiple witnesses, threatened the occupants. How exactly do you characterize that as a business discussion? My client was concerned about Miss Moore's welfare. She left his employment under suspicious circumstances, and he wanted to ensure she was safe and not being held against her will. The audacity of the lie took Lena's breath away. She felt Ethan tense beside her, saw Charlie's jaw clench from across the aisle. Judge Morrison looked unimpressed. By bringing armed men? The frontier is a dangerous place, Your Honor. My client felt he needed protection. Protection from a 60-year-old woman, a ranch hand, and an unarmed girl? The judge's skepticism was evident. That seems excessive, Counselor. Briggs shifted tactics. Your Honor, the core issue here is whether Miss Moore was free to leave Mr. Thornton's employment or whether she was bound by legitimate debts. My client has documentation showing that Miss Moore's father owed him a substantial sum of money at the time of his death. Those debts legally transferred to his daughter. Debt servitude is illegal, Hastings interjected. This wasn't servitude. It was employment offered in exchange for debt forgiveness. Miss Moore was free to leave at any time, provided she settled her accounts. With money she couldn't possibly earn while working for starvation wages, Ethan said, unable to contain himself. Judge Morrison's gavel came down again. Mr. Cole, I appreciate your passion, but I need you to remain silent unless called upon. Understood? Ethan nodded stiffly. The judge turned back to Briggs. You have documentation of these debts? I do, Your Honor. Briggs produced a sheaf of papers, presenting them with a flourish. Funeral expenses, room and board, wages advanced, clothing provided, all properly recorded and signed. Lena's stomach sank as she recognized her own signature on some of the documents. She'd signed them in a daze of grief and desperation after her father's death, not understanding what they meant, not realizing she was signing away years of her life. But Hastings had been ready for this. Your Honor, I'd like to call Miss Lena Moore to the stand. This was it, the moment Lena had been dreading and preparing for. She stood on shaking legs, acutely aware of every eye in the courtroom following her. Ethan squeezed her hand once before releasing it, his expression full of encouragement and love. The bailiff swore her in, and she settled into the witness chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Miss Moore, Hastings began gently, can you tell the court how you came to work at the Silver Dollar Saloon? Lena took a deep breath. My father was a prospector. He came to Colorado in 1875, chasing silver claims in the hills. I came with him after my mother died. We were going to make a new start. Her voice wavered slightly. He died in a mine collapse in March of 1876. I was 19 years old, alone, with no family and no money. Jack Thornton came to me and said my father owed him for supplies, for filing fees, for various debts. He said if I worked for him at his saloon, he'd forgive the debts and provide me with room and board. Did he specify how long you would need to work to clear these debts? No, sir. He just said until they were paid off. And did he ever tell you how much the debts totaled? Not exactly. The amount seemed to change. Every time I asked, he'd add something new. Rent for the room, cost of my dresses, food I ate. By the end, he was claiming I owed him over $300. A murmur ran through the courtroom. $300 was more than most cowboys made in a year. How much did Mr. Thornton pay you for your work? I received no wages. He said all my labor went toward paying down the debt. So you worked for 3 years without receiving a single dollar in compensation? Yes, sir. Briggs rose. Objection, Your Honor. Miss Moore received compensation in the form of room, board, and clothing, which she wouldn't have needed if she wasn't working at the saloon in the first place, Hastings shot back. It's circular reasoning designed to trap her in perpetual servitude. Judge Morrison nodded slowly. Overruled. Continue, Marshal. Hastings approached the witness stand. Miss Moore, can you describe your working conditions at the Silver Dollar? This was harder. Lena had to force the words past the tightness in her throat. I worked from early morning until late at night, sometimes 20 hours or more. I served drinks, cleaned tables, scrubbed floors. If I made a mistake, if a customer complained, if I couldn't work fast enough. She stopped, gathering courage. Mr. Thornton would hit me. He physically struck you? Yes, sir, multiple times. The worst was the night Mr. Cole intervened. I'd been working for nearly 20 hours straight. I sat down in the hallway for just a moment because I was so tired I couldn't stand anymore. Mr. Thornton found me and beat me in front of the entire saloon. He hit me 3 times before Mr. Cole stopped him. Did anyone else try to stop him? No, sir. They just watched. The courtroom was utterly silent now. Even those who'd come expecting a show seemed sobered by the quiet horror in Lena's testimony. What happened after Mr. Cole intervened? He paid my debts, $300 in cash. Then he took me to his ranch and offered me honest work for fair wages. No threats, no conditions, no violence, just work. And on August 15th of this year, what happened? Lena described the attack in careful detail. Jack's arrival with armed men, his threats, the shooting, her own defense with the poker. Her voice remained steady, clinical, as though she were describing events that had happened to someone else. Thank you, Miss Moore, Hastings said when she finished. Your witness, Mr. Briggs. The lawyer approached with a sympathetic expression that made Lena's skin crawl. Miss Moore, I'm sorry for what you've been through, truly, but I need to ask you some difficult questions. I understand. You say Mr. Thornton beat you, but you have no scars, no permanent injuries. Isn't it possible you're exaggerating what happened? The bruises healed, the fear didn't. But you admit the bruises healed, so the injuries couldn't have been that severe. Lena met his eyes steadily. He broke my spirit for 3 years, Mr. Briggs. That's a different kind of injury, one that takes longer to heal. Briggs's expression flickered with annoyance. You also claim you were working 20-hour days, yet you were well-fed, clothed, housed. Doesn't that suggest Mr. Thornton was taking adequate care of you? He kept me alive enough to keep working. That's not the same as care. Miss Moore, isn't it true that you and Mr. Cole have developed a personal relationship since you left the Silver Dollar? The question hung in the air like a threat. Lena felt heat rise to her cheeks but refused to look away. Yes. A romantic relationship? Yes. So isn't it possible that your testimony here today is colored by your desire to please Mr. Cole? That you're exaggerating or even fabricating these claims to justify his interference in Mr. Thornton's business? Before Lena could answer, Ethan was on his feet. How dare you? The gavel cracked. Mr. Cole, sit down or I'll have you removed. Ethan sat, but his eyes burned with fury. Lena spoke into the silence, her voice clear and strong. My relationship with Ethan Cole began after he rescued me from a beating. I love him because he showed me what it means to be treated with dignity. If anything, my feelings for him prove how wrong Jack Thornton was. Because Ethan has never once raised his hand to me, never threatened me, never made me feel like I was less than human. He's everything Jack Thornton isn't, and that's exactly why I'm telling the truth here today. The courtroom erupted. Judge Morrison hammered his gavel repeatedly, calling for order. When the noise finally subsided, his expression was thoughtful. Miss Moore, you may step down. Mr. Briggs, do you have further witnesses? I called Jack Thornton to the stand. Jack lumbered to the witness chair, his bulk making it creak. Under oath, he spun a tale of benevolent employer wronged by an ungrateful employee. According to him, Lena had been treated with nothing but kindness. The debts were legitimate. The work conditions were standard for the industry, and the beating Ethan had witnessed was merely a justified disciplinary action for sleeping on the job. She was lazy, Jack said, his voice taking on a wheedling tone. Always trying to get out of work. I had to be firm with her, make sure she understood the expectations. Firm, Hastings repeated when his turn came for cross-examination. Is that what you call hitting a woman half your size? I never hit her that hard, and only when she deserved it. So you admit you struck her? Jack's face reddened. I disciplined my employee. That's within my rights. Actually, Mr. Thornton, it's not. Striking an employee is assault under territorial law, regardless of your justification. Hastings let that sink in. Now, let's talk about August 15th. Why did you go to the coal ranch? To check on Lena, make sure she was all right. By bringing 3 armed men? The frontier's dangerous. I needed protection. Protection from what exactly? Mr. Cole's ranch is one of the most respected operations in the territory. From Cole himself, man's got a temper. A laugh escaped from someone in the gallery. Even the judge looked skeptical. Mr. Thornton, multiple witnesses say you threatened Miss Moore and attempted to force her to return with you. Is that checking on her welfare? I was offering her the chance to come back. Better working conditions, higher pay. She belonged... He stopped himself, but the damage was done. She belonged to you? Hastings pressed. Is that what you were going to say? She owed me money. That debt created an obligation that Mr. Cole paid in full. The debt no longer exists. He can't just buy a person. No, Mr. Thornton, he can't. But you seem to think you can, and that's exactly what this case is about. The cross-examination continued for another hour, with Briggs repeatedly objecting and Jack growing increasingly flustered. By the time Hastings was finished, Jack's story had more holes than a mining sieve. The marshal called Charlie, James, and Maria to the stand, each providing testimony that corroborated Lena's account. Charlie described finding the wounded men and the evidence of gunfire. James detailed the threats Jack had made and his own warning shots. Maria spoke passionately about Lena's condition when she first arrived at the ranch, the bruises and fear and exhaustion. "That child looked like she'd been through hell," Maria said fiercely. "And the man who put her through it is sitting right there, acting like he's the victim. It's disgusting." Finally, as the afternoon sun slanted through the courthouse windows, Judge Morrison called for closing statements. Briggs went first, painting Jack as a misunderstood businessman victimized by a vindictive couple with an axe to grind. His speech was polished and professional, but it lacked conviction. Even he seemed to realize his client's position was untenable. Hastings was more direct. "Your Honor, the evidence is clear. Jack Thornton used debt to trap Lena Moore in conditions that amounted to slavery. When she escaped with Mr. Cole's help, Thornton tried to take her back by force. This isn't a business dispute. It's a man trying to reclaim property he never had a right to in the first place. The law is clear on this matter, and I trust you'll apply it accordingly." Judge Morrison adjourned for deliberation. The wait was agonizing. Lena sat with Ethan in the hallway, his arm around her shoulders, while people filed past with curious glances. Some looked sympathetic, others looked hostile. Lena tried not to care. "Whatever happens," Ethan said quietly, "we'll face it together." "I know." She leaned into his warmth. "I'm not afraid anymore." An hour later, they were called back into the courtroom. Judge Morrison looked grave as he surveyed the assembled crowd. "I've reviewed the evidence and testimony presented today. This case raises serious questions about the practice of debt servitude in our territory, questions that frankly should have been addressed years ago." Lena held her breath. "Mr. Thornton, your actions constitute assault, attempted kidnapping, and criminal threatening. The debt arrangements you made with Miss Moore were exploitative and possibly illegal under territorial statutes prohibiting involuntary servitude. I'm ruling in favor of the prosecution on all counts." The courtroom exploded with noise. Jack's face went purple. Briggs was on his feet immediately, shouting about appeals. But the judge's gavel cut through it all. "Furthermore," Morrison continued, "I'm issuing a permanent restraining order. Mr. Thornton, you are to have no contact whatsoever with Miss Moore or anyone associated with the Cole Ranch. If you violate this order, you will be arrested immediately. Do you understand?" Jack's mouth worked soundlessly. "Do you understand, Mr. Thornton?" "Yes," Jack finally choked out. "Good. Sentencing will be in 2 weeks. Marshal Hastings will determine the specific charges. This court is adjourned." Lena felt Ethan's arms around her before she fully processed what had happened. They'd won. The judge had ruled in their favor. Jack would face consequences for what he'd done. And most importantly, she was free. Truly, legally, irrevocably free. "It's over," Ethan murmured against her hair. "You're safe now." Tears streamed down Lena's face, but they were tears of relief, of joy, of closure. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything. For believing in me, for fighting for me, for loving you," he finished. "Always." They left the courthouse hand in hand, walking past the stairs in whispers with their heads high. Outside, the late afternoon sun painted Main Street in gold, and the air smelled of dust and possibility. Charlie, James, and Maria were waiting by the wagon, all three beaming. "Well done, Nina," Maria said, pulling Lena into a fierce embrace. "You were magnificent in there." "We all were," Lena said. "I couldn't have done it without you." As they climbed into the wagon for the ride home, Ethan turned to Lena with a question in his eyes. "There's something I want to ask you, something I've been thinking about for weeks." Lena's heart skipped. "What is it?" "Not here. When we get home. I want to do this right." The ride back to the ranch felt both endless and too short. By the time they arrived, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange and purple. Ethan helped Lena down from the wagon, then led her away from the house toward the small rise where they could see the prairie stretching to the horizon. "Lena Moore," he began, taking both her hands in his. "4 months ago, I walked into that saloon and saw something that changed my life. Not just a woman in trouble, but someone extraordinary who'd been beaten down but not broken. Someone who deserved better than what this world had given her." "Ethan, let me finish. These past months, watching you heal and grow and become who you were always meant to be, has been the greatest privilege of my life. You're strong and brave and kind, and I love you more than I thought it was possible to love anyone." He dropped to one knee, and Lena's breath caught. "I don't have a ring yet, but I have a question. Will you marry me? Will you be my partner in this ranch and in this life? Will you let me spend the rest of my days proving that you made the right choice?" Lena was crying again, but these were the best tears she'd ever shed. "Yes," she said, pulling him to his feet. "Yes. 1,000 times, yes." They kissed as the sun disappeared below the horizon, two people who'd found each other against all odds, who'd fought for the right to build a life together, who'd proven that sometimes love was enough to overcome even the darkest past. When they finally returned to the house, Maria took one look at their faces and let out a whoop of joy. "About time. I was beginning to think you'd never ask her properly." "You knew?" Ethan asked. "Everyone knew. You two were the only ones dancing around it." She pulled them both into an embrace. "I'm so happy for you both." That night, sitting around the table with the people who'd become her family, Lena felt something she'd never experienced before. Not just safety or happiness, but belonging. She belonged here, in this house, with these people, building a future she'd chosen for herself. Jack Thornton would be sentenced in 2 weeks. The restraining order meant he could never threaten her again. And even if he tried, she knew she had the strength to face him, because she wasn't the broken girl from the Silver Dollar anymore. She was Lena Moore, soon to be Lena Cole, a woman who'd claimed her freedom and found her home, a woman who'd learned that sometimes the best revenge against those who'd tried to destroy you was simply living well. And that was exactly what she intended to do. The wedding took place on a crisp October morning, 2 months after the trial that had finally severed every chain binding Lena to her past. The air carried the first hint of approaching winter, sharp and clean, and the aspens on the hillsides had turned to gold. It was a small ceremony, held at the ranch with only their closest friends in attendance, but to Lena it felt more significant than any grand affair in a cathedral could have been. She wore a dress Maria had helped her sew, cream-colored silk with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. It was the first truly beautiful thing she'd ever owned, made with her own hands for a purpose that filled her with joy rather than dread. As she stood before the traveling minister who'd agreed to perform the ceremony, Ethan's hands warm in hers, she felt the weight of her old life finally lift away completely. "I, Ethan Cole, take you, Lena Moore, to be my wife," Ethan said, his voice steady but his eyes bright with emotion. "I promise to stand beside you in times of plenty and times of want, in sickness and in health, in joy and in sorrow. I promise to protect you, cherish you, and honor you for all the days of my life." Lena's voice trembled as she repeated her own vows, but not from fear. "I, Lena Moore, take you, Ethan Cole, to be my husband. I promise to be your partner in all things, to build a life with you based on trust and love and mutual respect. I promise to stand with you through whatever challenges come our way, knowing that together we're stronger than we could ever be alone." When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Ethan kissed her gently, reverently, as though she were something precious and fragile. But Lena knew she wasn't fragile anymore. She'd been tested by fire and emerged tempered like steel. The celebration that followed was joyful and uncomplicated. Charlie played his fiddle while Tom and James danced with Maria, all of them laughing as the older woman showed the young men how poorly they moved. Neighbors from surrounding ranches had come bearing food and good wishes. People who'd known Ethan his whole life and had watched him transform his father's legacy into something worthy of pride. "Never seen him this happy," one old-timer said to Lena as they watched Ethan talk with a group of ranchers. "That boy carried the weight of his father's sins for too long. You've given him something I wasn't sure he'd ever find. Peace." "He gave it to me first," Lena replied softly. As evening approached and the guests began to depart, Lena found herself standing on the porch with Maria, watching the sunset paint the prairie in shades of amber and rose. "You know what I see when I look at you now?" Maria asked. "What?" "A woman who knows her worth. A woman who chose her own destiny instead of accepting what others tried to force on her." Maria squeezed her hand. "Your mother would be proud of the person you've become." Lena felt tears prick her eyes but blinked them back. "I wish she could have met Ethan. Wish my father could have too. Maybe if he'd known there were good men in the world, he wouldn't have been so desperate to strike it rich. Wouldn't have died chasing silver that was never there. Maybe, but then you wouldn't have found your way here. Sometimes the hardest paths lead to the best destinations. Maria smiled. Now, go to your husband. I'll finish cleaning up. That night, lying beside Ethan in the room that was now theirs together, Lena felt the final pieces of her broken past knit themselves into something whole. This was her life now, not one dictated by debt or fear or violence, but one she'd claimed through her own courage and strength. "What are you thinking about?" Ethan asked, his arm draped around her waist. "How different everything is from a year ago. How impossible this would have seemed then. Do you ever regret it? Leaving the saloon, coming here, all of it?" Lena turned to face him, her hand coming up to trace the line of his jaw. "Not for a single second. You gave me the chance to remember who I was before fear took over. You showed me what love looks like when it's real and freely given. How could I ever regret that?" He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "I'm the one who should be grateful. You trusted me when you had every reason not to trust any man ever again. That's a gift I'll never take for granted." They made love slowly, tenderly, discovering each other with the patience of two people who knew they had all the time in the world. And when Lena finally drifted to sleep in her husband's arms, she dreamed not of the past but of the future stretching bright and limitless before them. The following weeks settled into a new rhythm as Lena adjusted to her role as Ethan's wife and partner in running the ranch. She'd always worked hard, but now the work had a different quality. She wasn't laboring to pay off debts that would never be satisfied. She was building something that belonged to her as much as to Ethan, creating a legacy that would endure. She learned the business side of ranching from Ethan, studying the account books and understanding the economics of cattle prices and seasonal markets. She learned animal husbandry from Charlie, how to spot illness in livestock and treat minor injuries. From James, she learned to ride properly, graduating from the gentle mare they'd started her on to a spirited paint horse she named Freedom. And from Maria, she continued learning the domestic arts, though now she experimented with her own recipes and methods, finding confidence in her own judgment. But the greatest change came in how the community viewed her. At first, there'd been whispers and speculation about the former saloon girl who'd married Ethan Cole. Some people questioned her character. Others suggested she'd trapped him somehow, used feminine wiles to ensnare a decent man. Lena heard the gossip and refused to let it wound her. "Let them talk," she told Ethan when he fumed about the latest rumor making rounds in Redemption. "Their opinions don't change who we are or what we've built together." "It's not right. You deserve respect." "I have respect. From you, from Maria and the hands, from the people whose opinions actually matter. The rest will come in time, or it won't. Either way, I'm not going to let small-minded gossip steal my peace." Her wisdom proved correct. As months passed and people saw how the ranch thrived under their joint stewardship, saw how happy and healthy Lena looked, saw the genuine partnership between husband and wife, the whispers began to change. Respect, grudging at first but growing more genuine over time, replaced the suspicion. The first real test came in late November when Lena accompanied Ethan into Redemption for supplies. She hadn't been back to town since the trial, hadn't walked these streets as a free woman. As they drove down Main Street past the Silver Dollar where her nightmare had begun, Lena felt her pulse quicken, but it was anticipation rather than fear that made her heart race. They stopped at the general store, and Lena walked in with her head high, Ethan's hand resting supportively at her back. The proprietor, Mr. Henderson, greeted them warmly. "Mrs. Cole, Mr. Cole, good to see you both. What can I help you with today?" Mrs. Cole. The name still gave Lena a thrill. "We need flour, sugar, coffee, and some yard goods if you have any new stock." As Henderson gathered their order, his wife emerged from the back room. Mrs. Henderson was a formidable woman who'd lived in Redemption since its founding and whose opinion carried considerable weight. She looked Lena up and down with sharp eyes. "You're looking well, dear," she said finally. "Marriage agrees with you." "Thank you, ma'am. I'm very happy." "I can see that. And I want you to know my husband and I were appalled by what happened to you at that saloon. Should have been stopped years ago. I'm glad you found your way out and found someone worthy of you." The unexpected kindness made Lena's throat tight. "That's very kind of you to say." "Not kindness. Truth. And I hope you'll consider joining the ladies' auxiliary when you have time. We meet every other Tuesday. Could use someone with your grit and determination." It was an invitation into respectable society, an acknowledgement that Lena belonged. She accepted with genuine pleasure, feeling another piece of her new life click into place. As they loaded their supplies into the wagon, Lena glanced toward the silver dollar. The saloon looked shabby in the harsh afternoon light, paint peeling and windows grimy. A few dejected horses stood tied outside, but the crowds that had once packed the place seemed to have thinned considerably. "Business isn't good for Jack these days," Ethan said, following her gaze. "Word got around about what he did. A lot of men won't drink there anymore. Says something about a man when he beats a woman half to death for falling asleep." "What happened to him?" "After the sentencing. 6 months in jail, substantial fines, and he had to sell off some of his property to pay for it all. He's out now, but he's a shadow of what he was. Bitter and drunk most of the time." Ethan's expression was hard. "Can't say I feel much sympathy." "Neither can I," Lena admitted. "But I also don't waste energy hating him anymore. He doesn't deserve space in my thoughts." As they prepared to leave town, a young woman approached the wagon hesitantly. She was thin and pale, with the exhausted look Lena recognized all too well. It took a moment before Lena placed her, Sarah, one of the girls who'd worked at the Silver Dollar, alongside her. "Mrs. Cole?" Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I heard you were in town and I had to—" She stopped, wringing her hands. "I need help. I'm trying to leave the saloon, but I don't have anywhere to go, and Mr. Thornton says I still owe him money and I don't know what to do." Lena looked at Ethan, who nodded immediately. She turned back to Sarah with a warm smile. "How much does Jack say you owe him?" "Nearly $200 for room and board, and it doesn't matter what he says it's for. Those debts aren't legitimate." Lena climbed down from the wagon and took Sarah's hands. "Listen to me. You don't have to stay there. There are other options." "But where would I go? I don't have skills for anything else." "That's what he wants you to believe, but it's not true." Lena thought quickly. The Hendersons mentioned they're looking for help at the general store, and the widow Morrison needs someone to help with her boarding house. Both are honest work for honest wages. I'll speak to them on your behalf if you'd like. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "You'd do that for me? After everything?" "You never did anything to me, Sarah. And I remember what it was like to feel trapped with no way out. No one should have to live like that." Lena squeezed her hands. "Come by the ranch tomorrow. We'll figure this out together." After Sarah left, practically running in her eagerness to escape before Jack might see her talking to them, Ethan pulled Lena into his arms. "You're remarkable," he said against her hair. "Most people who escaped what you escaped would want nothing to do with reminders of that time, but you're reaching back to help others climb out." "Someone reached back for me," Lena said simply. "How could I do anything less?" Sarah came to the ranch the next day, and by the end of the week she was working at the boarding house with a room of her own and wages she could actually keep. She was the first, but not the last. Over the following months, 3 more women from the Silver Dollar found their way to Lena, and she helped each one find respectable employment and housing. Jack Thornton's empire continued to crumble as his workforce dwindled and his reputation sank lower. Winter arrived in earnest, blanketing the prairie in snow and driving the cattle close to the ranch buildings where they could be fed and monitored. The work was hard but satisfying, and Lena threw herself into it with enthusiasm. She learned to help with difficult births when the early calves arrived, to treat frostbite and winter ailments, to keep the books balanced when money was tight. On Christmas morning, she woke to find Ethan already dressed and grinning like a boy with a secret. "I have something for you," he said, pulling her out of bed and wrapping her in a heavy coat. "Come on." He led her out to the barn where Charlie, James, Tom, and Maria were already gathered, all of them looking pleased with themselves. In one of the stalls stood a beautiful black mare, her coat gleaming in the lamplight. "She's yours," Ethan said. "I've been training her for months. Wanted to give you something that was completely yours, not borrowed or shared." Lena approached the mare slowly, extending her hand for the horse to sniff. The animal nickered softly, her dark eyes gentle. "She's beautiful. What's her name?" "That's up to you. She's your horse." Lena thought for a moment, stroking the mare's soft nose. "Hope," she said finally. "Her name is Hope, because that's what Ethan gave me when he brought me here, a reason to hope for better days." The mare waffled into her palm as if in agreement, and everyone laughed. Spring came with its usual flurry of activity: calving season, branding, preparing fields for planting. But this spring brought something else, too. In early April, Lena realized she was pregnant. The discovery filled her with a complex mixture of emotions. Joy, certainly, at the prospect of having a child with Ethan, but also fear, because childbirth was dangerous on the frontier and she'd seen too many women die bringing life into the world. And wonder, because this child would represent everything she'd thought she could never have: a family, a future, a legacy built on love rather than pain. When she told Ethan, he lifted her off her feet and spun her around, laughing with pure delight. "We're going to be parents," he kept saying, as though he couldn't quite believe it. "We're going to have a family." "Are you happy?" Lena asked, though his joy was obvious. Happy doesn't begin to cover it. Terrified, ecstatic, grateful, overwhelmed. He set her down gently, his hands moving to rest on her still flat stomach. "This child is going to grow up knowing they're loved and wanted. They'll never know the kind of fear and hardship you experienced. I'll make sure of it." "We'll make sure of it," Lena corrected. "Together." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer. Lena continued working as long as she was able, only slowing down in the final months when her expanding belly made movement more difficult. Maria fussed over her constantly, insisting she rest more and eat better. Ethan treated her like she was made of glass, hovering protectively until Lena had to laugh and remind him that women had been having babies since the dawn of time. "Not my woman," he said stubbornly. "Not carrying my child. I'm allowed to worry." "You're allowed," she agreed, kissing him softly. "But I'm stronger than I look. I survived Jack Thornton. I can survive childbirth." Their daughter was born in late November, a squalling, red-faced bundle of fury who came into the world fighting. Lena labored through the night with Maria and the midwife attending her, Ethan pacing holes in the floor of the main room. When the baby's first cries split the air, he burst into the bedroom, his face wild with relief and fear. "Is she all right? Is Lena—" "Both fine," Maria said, beaming. "Come meet your daughter." Ethan approached the bed where Lena lay exhausted but radiant, holding their child. The baby had stopped crying and was looking around with dark, curious eyes. When Ethan touched her tiny hand, her fingers wrapped around his thumb with surprising strength. "She's perfect," he whispered. "You're both perfect." They named her Sarah, after the first girl Lena had helped escape the silver dollar, and Hope for her middle name. Sarah Hope Cole grew quickly, a healthy baby with her father's gray eyes and her mother's determination. Watching Ethan with their daughter, so gentle and loving, everything his own father had never been, Lena felt her heart expand in ways she hadn't known were possible. The years flowed by like water, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. Sarah was followed by a son they named Thomas after Tom, who'd become like family. Then came twins, a boy and girl they named Charles and Maria, honoring the two people who'd been there from the beginning. The house expanded to accommodate the growing family, and the ranch prospered under Lena and Ethan's joint leadership. Lena became known throughout the territory not just as Ethan Cole's wife, but as a formidable woman in her own right. She served on the school board, helped establish a fund for women escaping difficult situations, and mentored young girls who needed guidance and support. The women she'd helped over the years stayed in touch, building lives of their own and creating a network of mutual support. Jack Thornton died in the winter of 1885, drunk and alone in a boarding house room. The silver dollar had closed 2 years earlier, unable to compete once its unsavory reputation became widely known. Lena felt no satisfaction in his death, only a distant sadness for the waste of it all. He'd had power and money and opportunity, and he'd squandered it all on cruelty and control. "Do you ever think about what might have happened if I hadn't walked into that saloon that night?" Ethan asked her after they'd heard the news. Lena considered the question seriously. They were sitting on the porch watching their children play in the yard, Sarah teaching the younger ones to rope a fence post, all of them laughing and shrieking with joy. "I try not to," she admitted, "because that path leads to a darkness I don't want to revisit. I'm just grateful you did walk in, that you saw someone worth saving when I'd stopped seeing it in myself. I didn't save you, Lena. I just gave you the space to save yourself. Then I'm grateful for that space, and for everything that came after. By 1890, the ranch had grown into one of the most successful operations in Colorado Territory. Lena and Ethan were respected members of the community. Their marriage held up as an example of partnership and mutual devotion. Their children were thriving, each one inheriting their parents' strength and compassion. On a warm summer evening, as they celebrated their 12th wedding anniversary, Lena stood on the porch watching the sunset paint the prairie gold. Sarah, now 11, was helping her father with the evening feeding. The younger children were supposedly washing up for supper, though the shrieks of laughter from inside suggested a water fight had broken out. Maria, now in her 70s but still spry, joined Lena on the porch. "You did good, Nina," she said, using the old endearment. "Built yourself quite a life." "We did good," Lena corrected. "All of us together." "True enough. But you were the one brave enough to take the first step, to trust Ethan when trust was the hardest thing in the world. Everything else flowed from that choice." Lena thought about that choice, made on a terrible night when she'd been at her absolute lowest. She thought about the woman she'd been then, broken, frightened, convinced her life had no value. And she thought about the woman she'd become, strong, confident, surrounded by love and purpose. "Do you know what the best part is?" Lena asked. "What's that?" "The children will never know what it's like to be powerless. They're growing up knowing they're valued and loved, that their voices matter, that they have choices. Sarah wants to be a teacher. Tom wants to study law. The twins are still figuring things out, but they have time. They have everything I never did at their age." "That's your legacy," Maria said. "Not just breaking free yourself, but making sure the next generation never has to experience what you did." As the sun dipped below the horizon and the first stars began to appear, Ethan called everyone in for supper. The table was crowded and noisy, filled with the beautiful chaos of family life. Lena looked around at the faces she loved most in the world, her husband, her children, the people who'd become her chosen family, and felt a peace so complete it brought tears to her eyes. This was what freedom looked like. Not just the absence of chains, but the presence of love. Not just surviving, but thriving. Not just existing, but living with intention and purpose and joy. After the children were in bed and the house had quieted, Lena and Ethan returned to the porch, their customary evening ritual. The prairie stretched before them, vast and dark and studded with stars. "Do you ever regret it?" Lena asked, echoing his question from years ago. "Taking a chance on a broken girl from a saloon?" Ethan pulled her close, his arm warm around her shoulders. "That broken girl became the strongest woman I've ever known. She built a family, ran a ranch, changed lives, and showed me what real courage looks like. So no, Lena, I've never regretted it for a single moment." "Good," she said, resting her head against his shoulder. "Because I intend to keep you around for a long, long time." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. The wind whispered through the grass, carrying the scent of sage and pine. And in that moment, surrounded by everything they'd built together, Lena felt the final ghost of her past dissolve into the night. She was no longer the girl who'd been beaten for falling asleep at work. She was Lena Cole, wife, mother, rancher, advocate, survivor. A woman who'd claimed her freedom and used it to build a life that mattered. A woman who'd proven that the darkest beginnings could lead to the brightest futures, if you were brave enough to reach for them. And when the cowboy who'd once promised that no more hands would ever touch her pulled her close and kissed her temple, Lena smiled. Because he'd kept that promise, and so many others besides. They'd built something beautiful out of the ruins of her old life. Something lasting and real and full of love. And that, Lena knew, was the best revenge of all. Not against those who'd tried to destroy her, but against the darkness itself. She'd survived. She'd healed. She'd thrived. She'd won. The end.